I went on birth control originally because my cycles were irregular. And so that's what happened when I went off birth control. At this point, they're not even irregular. They're not even coming back.
That was the voice of Sarah Freese. As you heard, she went on birth control to help manage her menstrual cycle. And when she went off birth control to start trying to have a baby, her cycle stopped altogether. She didn't know this at the time, but she would later be diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome, a fairly common hormonal disorder that can cause infertility. And then later, her doctor thought she may have been experiencing a different condition called hypothalamic amenorrhea, which is a condition that occurs when the hypothalamus stops producing gonadotropin-releasing hormone, which controls menstruation. Today, Sarah's going to share how she was able to overcome these obstacles and reach her family-building goals. I'm Lissa Kline with Progyny, and this is Infertility. Before we dive into Sarah's story, I just want to take a second to remind you that we have some resources available for anyone who might want to bring fertility and family-forming benefits to their employer at progyny.com/talk2HR. Most employers that offer these benefits do so because an employee asked for it. So take advantage of our resources and help bring this life-changing benefit to your employer. As I said at the top of this episode, today we're going to get to know Sarah and her experience with infertility. So let's dive in.
So I'm Sarah Freese, and I work at LinkedIn, and I am a principal customer success manager based out of our Chicago office.
Sarah and her husband got married when she was 33 years old and he was 32 years old. And the plan after the wedding was to start trying.
But we ended up getting married at my parents' house right when the pandemic hit. And we decided that we wanted to, begin a family right away. The thing is, I had been on birth control at this point for about 12, 13 years. And everyone always said, my doctors had always said, well, you go off your birth control, then your cycle will come back and you kind of go from there. And my cycle never came back. We were just waiting and waiting, and it never came back. And so I went to go see my OBGYN pretty quickly to do some fertility testing. And they really couldn't figure out like what was going on. And it was one of those things, well, just wait.
The rule of thumb for those under 35 years of age is to try to conceive for about a year before seeking the help of a fertility doctor. And for those 35 and older, to seek help after trying for 6 months. But in this case, there is a very good reason to assume that trying at home wouldn't work. Sarah wasn't ovulating, and if you aren't ovulating, you won't become pregnant from sex.
I'm not very patient, but I also had a feeling, I feel like when you talk to a lot of people in this situation, a lot of people say, well, I just felt something wasn't right. I didn't want to wait. I just felt like in my gut that I should go see someone sooner. So that's like what I did. I saw my OB. I was like, you know what? I'm going to, while I'm waiting here for my cycle to show up, and it never did, I'm going to go ahead and just start doing some research on reproductive endocrinologists in the area and just start to explore like who I can see. And it was probably about 6 months from the time we started trying to the time that we saw someone that I didn't wait that. I did not wait that standard like 1 year, but no one's going to get pregnant if you're not having a cycle. So that kind of like accelerated everything.
Sarah was onto something. She saw a fertility doctor and was diagnosed with PCOS.
PCOS is one of those diagnoses that, it's a diagnosis of exclusion. And my RE that I saw, he wasn't sure if I was hypothalamic amenorrhea or if I was PCOS. A lot of those two diagnoses, there's a lot of the same symptoms that come up with both of them. And so it was through additional blood work that he diagnosed me as PCOS. But it is kind of interesting because, as we go into this, I did a second retrieval and he actually thought, well, I think you actually now are more hypothalamic amenorrhea. So while I was originally diagnosed with PCOS, I wonder today, almost 2.5 years later, like, is that still my same diagnosis? Would I still be hypothalamic amenorrhea? I guess the body's always changing, but PCOS was the diagnosis that I was given originally.
Sarah was going to need fertility treatment, and her decision was made easier because she had access to the Progyny benefit from her employer, LinkedIn.
We decided to go straight to IVF. I had another family member who had gone through a ton of other fertility treatment, and they ultimately led to IVF. And I had seen her really just be in the trenches, and then ultimately, doing the timed intercourse, doing IUIs, and none of it still working. And they ultimately still wound up doing IVF. My husband and I made the decision that, hey, let's go straight to IVF. It has the highest chance of success. We were able to do what we wanted to do. And that's what's so great about Progyny, is that we could make that decision based on what was best for us. And also knowing that my age at that time, I was going to be 33. And, when a month later, I was going to be 34 by the time we started the first egg retrieval. I'm like, I really don't have that much time. And we go forward with our first frozen embryo transfer, and you're just so excited. And I don't think there was any doubt in my mind that it wouldn't work. I'm just so excited. I'm so excited to do the frozen embryo transfer. And we ended up transferring at the end of March in 2021. And I just remember the nurse calling me and telling me that it was negative. And you're just so devastated because your hopes and dreams and everything just dies in that one phone call. And it's just, you take the time to grieve. And then I just got right back into like research mode. I was like, why didn't this work? What do I need to do? Okay, this is like, if we're going to do this again, I just hate this feeling. Like, we need to figure out like how we're going to get this to work. Again, we go through the whole process, and we get the call. And of course, it's negative again. And it's just, it gets harder and harder every single time you hear that news, because now you're really wondering and starting to get scared. Why isn't this working? I feel like I'm seeing all of these success stories. We decided to do a different protocol. So I had my doctor's so great, and he makes himself really accessible. Of course, I've been doing research to kind of figure out, is there a different protocol that might work? And he's always so open and receptive to different ideas. And we decided for the next one that we were going to do, we were still going to do a frozen embryo transfer, but the protocol that we were going to use was like a modified stimulated protocol. So not using it's very typical. You use estrogen pills and then kind of build up your lining and then you transfer, but instead rather using like the meds that you use for a retrieval, using the FSH meds to grow your follicles that way, and then to do a trigger shot and use your natural hormones, so using your natural progesterone and your natural estrogen to then force your body to ovulate, and then transfer X amount of days later with your genetically normal embryo. And so we did that, and for our third transfer, we actually did get pregnant. And so here we are, we're so excited. It was a really strong number. And I went in for my beta number 2, and the numbers aren't doubling. I think we had like a 30% increase. Just the pit in my stomach. I remember looking at the results in the portal, and just like everything just kind of falls beneath you, and knowing that you want to see your numbers doubling at least, around that 48-hour mark, and they weren't. But my clinic, they called me, and of course they're not concerned yet, and they tell you to come in for another beta 2 days later. But ultimately, it wasn't a viable pregnancy. My numbers were all over the place, and just talk about a roller coaster of emotions. Like, here we're so excited that we're pregnant and we had implantation, but knowing that it's a non-viable pregnancy.
This was a particularly tough time for the couple. It was at this time that Sarah's favorite coping mechanisms, plus support from a therapist, really came through.
Yes, I had a therapist who was very instrumental in helping me kind of get through a lot of the ups and the downs. I continued with my acupuncture. For me, I found it really relaxing. I really got big into meditation of like trying to be in the moment. I found coloring. I found that coloring was very therapeutic to me, and it allowed me to be in that moment. I love to work out. I would work out. My husband and I would take walks. We, tried to kind of get away when we could. But, as you kind of go through these failed transfers and it's still not working, yes, it's all consuming, but we also did realize that we still need to do things to take care of ourselves and to kind of step away when we can. Not saying that I wasn't always thinking about it, but by meditating, by coloring, by going for a walk, it allowed me to kind of be in those moments and just really try to be present.
Outside of her relationship and therapy, she also found a support group through Resolve, and she found comfort in communicating with her colleagues at LinkedIn.
I also was very upfront with my manager, and I also have sales partners, and I was sharing with them what we were going through, and not in the moment of all of the ups and downs, but just, general high level of, what I was going through. And they even offered to connect me with people in their network that had gone through IVF.
This journey had been far more difficult than she had ever imagined, but she knew she still needed to move forward. And at this time, she and her doctor discussed a very different plan.
And at that time, we knew from a protocol standpoint that a stimulated protocol had worked for me. And also at this time, I'm 30, I'm going to almost be 35. I'm 34, I'll be 35, just in a few months. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, we had these 7 normal embryos. We've already gone through 3. We want to have more than one kid. Does it make sense to do another egg retrieval? With the potential, if possible, doing a fresh transfer, knowing that my body seems to respond better to the retrieval medications. We're like, you know what? Let's go ahead and try it for this second retrieval, and let's see potentially if this protocol ends up working.
As you can tell, there are actually a few different ways to do an IVF cycle, and what works great for one person might not work as well for someone else. So they moved ahead with another IVF cycle, retrieved more eggs, fertilized them, and then did a fresh transfer of one of the embryos. And a couple of weeks later, they got a call from their clinic.
Oh my gosh, we were together, and it's always good news when the doctor calls. So it wasn't the nurses that called. So I already knew that it was my doctor who was on the line, and I'm like, well, he's not calling. He's a very, very busy doctor. Like, he's not calling to tell me that it's negative. So as soon as he was on the other line, I knew that it was positive. I was just waiting for him to share what the beta number was, and he was obviously so excited, congratulations. And my husband and I, we just, we start crying, we hug each other, just like the sheer excitement and emotion. But I think it was just really after that, knowing that the previous one didn't work out, we were then nervous for the second beta, and that probably was very emotional, like once we found that those numbers were doubling correctly, because we're like, okay, well, this seems to be, we're making it farther than we did last time. And then the numbers, progressively increase. And then obviously you're so anxious going for that first ultrasound, really hoping that there's a heartbeat, because we went at 6 weeks one day, and there at that point in time there should be a heartbeat, and there was. And we were on cloud 9, and it was seriously, 2022 was probably the best year, because we did a retrieval, we got pregnant, I carried the pregnancy, successfully. Everyone was healthy. I was healthy. The baby was healthy. And then he joined us here in October.
It goes without saying that this was not an easy experience for Sarah and her husband. Through it all, they had support. We mentioned therapy and support groups, and of course the support she received from her doctor and the entire team at her fertility clinic. Sarah also had an outstanding support in the form of the Progyny benefit, a benefit that was made available to her by her employer, LinkedIn.
I feel like there are no words to thank a company to offer this benefit that has changed our life in the best possible way. So thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, LinkedIn, because it's life-changing.
I want to thank Sarah for joining us today and for sharing her story. We know that fertility and family building can be difficult, and we also know that talking about these things can be a real challenge. So we really appreciate Sarah speaking out. Remember, the purpose of stories like this isn't to give you a blueprint to how you can build your family, but rather to give you comfort in knowing that you really aren't alone in this journey. There are scores of people who are going through their own journeys, and while not all endings are the same, we hope that you can take some solace in knowing that there are options for support out there. Thank you for joining us today. If you want to connect with us, you can do so on Instagram at This Is Infertility Podcast. If you want to follow Progyny, you can do so at Progyny Inc. Of course, if you're listening on a podcast app, please leave a rating and review. This Is Infertility is brought to you by Progyny. Please remember this podcast is not intended to substitute for the personalized expert advice of your physician. I'm Lissa Kline, and this is Infertility.